then?
Yeah, I'll do that then.
Okay,
So
cool. I'll do that.
Yeah, the first question was, please share your experience of applying for the PhD scholarship in the UK, and what advices would you give?
Cool. Okay, should I just get started?
Mm.
Cool. Okay, so yeah, I think one of the main things that I was sort of thinking about was doing an early application, because there are so many people that apply quite early on and from all over the world. And I think one of the big advantages you can have is to do an early application, because then you sort of, as far as I'm aware, they have like a certain number of scholarships they allocate per year. And while they do say that they, try and evenly distribute the number of scholarships they have, I think they definitely, the earlier you apply, the more easy it is that you are, given the scholarship. And if not, then I suppose for the second round, you're still given consideration among the new people who have applied. So let's say you apply, the academic year starts in September. Let's say you apply in January, okay? Then for that January, you'll be given the priority. And then if there's a second round in June, and you didn't, get the scholarship offer in January, then you might be re-entered into the June round of scholarship offers as well. So in that case, it's sort of like twice as good, right? You're given twice the opportunity. Whereas if you would have applied, so for example, in May, then you would have only had the opportunity for the June scholarships, and that way you might be competing, among people who've already had the opportunities in January. So that's one thing I think is an early application could be quite good. But also I think one of the big things is, like, every university has scholarships, right? So you shouldn't really limit yourself to one university or one sort of research group. So even within universities, I think if you're within a certain faculty or a certain research group, or that's where you're applying to, I think you can sort of make the most of other groups as well, right? There's no necessary reason to just sort of think about one focus group. You could try and get in contact with multiple supervisors or prospective supervisors and see if they have different offers, because I suppose some supervisors are given preference for scholarships over others, right? Probably the more research intensive supervisors, or the supervisors who publish most, will probably be given preferential treatment for scholarships. These are probably assumptions that I'm making, but it just seems to be the case from what I see with other students, that most of the supervisors who have a lot of research behind them are the ones who sort of get the scholarship students, because it's just more likely that they'll continue to publish more with those students. So those are two things I can sort of think about. And I think, yeah, I mean, the basic stuff we should probably think about is just having a really solid application, making sure your CV is up to date, and you have all of your sort of prizes or accomplishments listed on your CV to quite long detail, because then you'll be able to have an edge over the other applicants. So some applicants might have sort of the same educational background as you, but the difference might be, in you receiving the scholarship, is maybe you will have a sort of a prize that you would have earned that that the other applicant might not have earned, and that will just give you a little bit of an extra edge on top of the other applicants, and that could be quite helpful, I think.
How about annual reviews? What do you think about the annual reviews?
Annual reviews, I think, okay, so you want to sort of get some advice on preparing for annual reviews, right? To be honest, I don't think there's one way of preparing. I think the best thing you can do is sort of, the best you can do is show everything you've been doing. So you want to show your progress. That's essentially the focus of the annual review, right? You don't want to have a final idea. You just want to show how you got to your current stage. And that's what I've learned. I mean, sometimes I would come to the annual, like for the first year, I was very worried about having a final idea for my annual review. And that was worrying, because I didn't have a final idea, and I just, I had a bunch of ideas that I've been working on for the first year. So it got to the first year annual review, and I think the best thing you can do is just show everything you've done since you started the PhD, every sort of, forward step and backward step you've taken, because then it paints a good picture for the independent reviewer, right? It gives them sort of a big focus, sort of a big vision of everything you've done. And then what you can do is, again, just tell them where you'd like to focus over the coming months, especially because I think you'll notice 3 years into the PhD, you still have very unfocused work, right? So it doesn't really matter to have something final by then, but you want to show that the progress is being made, and that's the key thing that will either result in a pass or a fail, right? And even a fail, I think, it's not necessarily a fail. It's just an opportunity to rework your ideas and come back in a few months' time and redo the annual review. So it's not something to worry about too much, but definitely in the in the first year, of course, you have the course requirements where you have to pass the courses, and that's fairly straightforward. But I think in anything after the first year, all you really need to do is just focus on showing progress and making sure that you're not sort of negligent to the work you've been doing, and you want to just show that everything you've done is sort of slowly coming together. Even if it's not great work at the moment, you need to show that there's some direction in the work that you're doing, and there's some way that you're headed, basically.
Do you think it was helpful, the annual reviews?
I think what's helpful about it is that you have got an opportunity to sort of look back at everything you've done. I think the problem with it is there's a lot of pressure, especially in first year, to have a final piece, and that's a lot of stress sometimes. I think after the first year, you realize very quickly that it's not much of a big deal, and you just sort of, you just do whatever you can. But in the first year, the pressure of especially passing the courses and making sure all the other, there's some other training that you have to do, and this, all that stuff getting ticked off, that's pressure. But once you get past that, I think you quickly realize that it's just an opportunity to, talk about what you've been doing, and then that's, it can be helpful, and sometimes it's not very much use. But in my case, my first year was not the most useful for the annual review, but the second year was definitely useful and gave me some sort of new perspective on my work. Yeah, so my second supervisor had a lot to say in my second year annual review, which was just it was perfect because I just took all the notes and it gave me a new direction, which is why I changed sort of topic as well, and that was very useful. But I think it's essentially it's just hit and miss. I think maybe one year it'll be useful, one year it won't be. It just depends on how how things are for you that year. Yeah.
I think it's a good way of practicing for your final or like conference presentations. I mean, in future, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and you have to make the presentation slides, and that, even though that's obviously a very easy thing to do, I think what's hard about that is it's sort of like an art. You want to make sure there's not too much information, and you want to make sure there's not too little. So it's not necessarily hard to create a presentation. It's just that what's hard about it is making sure you're getting your message across correctly and very, I think you quickly realize with academics as well, they just like simple things, don't they? So you want to make sure that you're saying as much as you can in as little words as possible. That's essentially the goal, isn't it? And that's the same goal with paper publications. That's the same with your PhD as a whole, right? You want to say a lot in as few words as possible, basically.
Exactly.
And that's what makes some good work, I think. And that's what you'll realize very quickly is hard about the PhD. I think that's, for me, is what, anyone can write anything, right? That's not very hard to write things. I think what's difficult is the sort of balancing how much you have to say in as few simple words as possible, and that's just like, I think that's academia, and it's sort of a sentence, really.
How do you think the COVID will impact your PhD life now?
Honestly, I think for a lot of humanities subjects, it's not going to be, I don't think it's a huge deal, right? Because we have a lot of these solutions, like online solutions. I think for the sciences, maybe it's different if you have a lab-based work that you need to do and that sort of thing. The only thing it can sort of impact for me is sort of, I was lucky in that I didn't really have any data collection planned for the COVID period, so I didn't have to worry about that. But I know for a lot of the colleagues, they had issues with, of course, people who've lost their jobs, so they are, no longer able to be interviewed. People who have just, people have had some people who've become sick, or people who've passed away from COVID, so they don't obviously have time for you to interview them. Or, I think it's logistically quite tough for these people. But in terms of the sort of, it's essentially for a lot of humanities subjects, all you really need is, your computer and an internet connection, and you're generally fine, right? Most supervisors now are able to have Zoom meetings, so that they don't really need to be in person with you. And as long as you have the software on your computer, you're generally okay. So it's not a huge impact. Obviously, if you've become sick or something like this could be, a different impact. And I think that isolation has impacts on you as well.
Yeah.
If you're alone, that must be really difficult. I'm lucky to have family with me, but but I'm sure that for people who are alone, that's tough. Yeah, so I think logistically it's a lot of trouble, but in general, I think we're still better off than a lot of the science subjects because we just don't need the same equipment that they do a lot of the time.
Was it easy for you to study at home?
Definitely not. No way. I think that's definitely something that's that's very, very difficult. I think being able to focus when you're at home is just next to impossible, and that's I think there are worse problems that people have, but it's definitely it's, if you're thinking about it long term, it's hard to just because there's just so many things to do, right? And if there's people around, then it's even worse because there are things to do with them as well, and then that just creates a lot of time wasted for your work, which you could have just spent in the office before the COVID time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How about talking with supervisors? Was it easy for you, like during the lockdown and stuff?
Yeah, I think for me and for you as well, I suppose that with our supervisor, he sort of works from home a lot anyway, right? So so we've been doing this for a long time, this sort of Zoom meeting style. So it didn't really change too much. I think it's I think with submitting work, that's been always the same as well. We'd submit work over email. We would never really print out work to submit and give in person. So yeah, I think for me at least with a supervisor, it's been pretty much the same. It's definitely nice when you meet with them in person because then you have it's just a different way of meeting. It's much better in person, I think. But I think in general, it's fine. Most supervisors can manage, I think.
How about any advice for the master students, like during the online this academic year, I guess? Since you did masters here, would you recommend doing masters this academic year, or defer 1 year?
I think if you want to do a master's, I think you should just do it because I don't, who knows how long this, this will last. I'm pretty sure that it will carry on for another year or two of this sort of, I think now there's a second wave, isn't it, across the world that's sort of coming into play. Who knows how many waves there'll be, or how long people will. Yeah, I think if you want to do it, I think you definitely should just do it. Make the most of the opportunity. If because who knows what life's gonna be like in another year or two. And yeah, I think in that case, it's obviously going to be difficult because a lot of it is going to be online, and then it's not always the best for everyone. But I don't think that should impact your work so much. If you're doing the masters for the work, right, for the learning that you want to do and the subject expertise you want to get, then that's not going to change too much. But of course, the social element is going to fall. Unless you, I suppose, make a really, really proactive effort to get in contact with people online who are on your course and make sort of bonds with them, proactively, that'll be different. But I think if you sort of just go about it the way the uni will take it, I think you could have some social challenges. You'll just probably be more, learning driven. You won't necessarily socialize as much. But I suppose if you're doing the masters, I think probably the ultimate motive for you is to get the subject expertise, right? You're not really going to be concerned so much about the social aspect as much as you maybe were at undergrad, right? So yeah, I think you should definitely still go for it if you want to.
Yeah, some people were asking, well, some international students were asking me whether they will be missing out a lot this year, like since they would like to travel, they would like to go to the library, use the universities, like those.
Yeah, that's a big aspect, isn't it? That's especially at Manchester. I think it's they have really good libraries and it's a city to be a student in and stuff. But I think it's a shame. But in terms of if you're healthy enough to be able to do the masters, then you're lucky already, right? I mean, people are sick, people have lost their lives, so I think it's. Yeah, you're definitely going to miss out a lot, but I think it's, I think you'll, I think you can make the most out of it in your own. I'm sure you can find a way to socialize with people, perhaps work from cafes that are open. I think some libraries will reopen slowly, right? Maybe they'll just limit the number of people coming in. yeah, but I definitely agree. It's not going to be the same, I think.
Isn't the school reopening soon? Like they were taking like names and
Yeah, I think they're taking a list. I think also the library's reopening with limited numbers. I think they're going to do like a certain amount of people per floor or something like this, and there's not going to be. So yeah, I think there's same as I think they're probably just going to approach it the same way sort of supermarkets are doing it and other public spaces where they just limit the numbers and make sure everyone's wearing a mask and that sort of thing. And then yeah, even though I don't, it's probably going to be really difficult to study with a mask on, right, in the library. But yeah.
Well, yeah, I heard the seminars will be on offline, face to face. Yeah.
Yeah, seminars are still in person. I think even for those though, they'll limit the number of students per seminar.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll probably be, but yeah, that's going to be in person. I think the lectures are going to be online, and that's yeah. I've not been up to date with it, but I'm sure the lectures are going to be online just because there's so many people that go to lectures. So yeah.
Right. So the next question: what are some of your recommendations for PhD students to finish the program within 3 years? Is it even possible?
Honestly, I think it's nothing's impossible, but I think it depends on a lot of things. I think for you to finish in 3 years, first of all, I think from day one you have to have a supervisor who's really, really sharp on deadlines and really, really speedy with this sort of thing. And I think if you've got a supervisor who's really fast at responding to your comments and who's really pressuring you to meet objectives by specific dates, then you can definitely do it within 3 years. The issue there is even if you have a really focused and driven supervisor, other things can happen, right? So, because PhDs are so long, people can get sick and need time out. You could, people, a lot of people get pregnant, some people get married, some people move country. So even if you have a really disciplined, focused supervisor and you're a disciplined, focused student, it could be that even though you're on track for 3 years, it could be that a few months before the 3 years is over, something happens that results in you having to delay for another year. Or, the PhD is different because it's so long. I mean, it's as long as your undergraduate program, but you have to, instead of 4 years of classes, you have 4 years of just sitting on your own and doing research. So it feels a lot longer than your undergrad does. And because of that, you just have to sort of, it doesn't matter how driven you are. You can have the issue of just life coming in the way of your your timeline, and that can just show up. For example, someone who's very young and single and live on your own, then in many ways you can just sort of smash through it in 3 years, even 2.5 years. Some people have done it and just go through it. But I think for a lot of people, they have family life commitments in whatever way they come in. Some people have to work to sort of provide for their family part-time, and that slows you down. So for a lot of people, I think it just ends up in being 3.5 to 4 years, not necessarily 3. Some people up to 5, I've heard, or 4.5 years. So it's not impossible, but it's uncommon to finish very, very fast, or within 3 years. That would be considered really, really fast. 3 years.
If you go back, would you do PhD again?
It's a difficult question. I think I would definitely do it again, but I think in a different way. I would, there's a lot that I would change. I think it's hard to say that, because if I went back, I wouldn't know, right? So you wouldn't really know everything that you want to change. But I think if I could start again, then I'd do things differently. With the knowledge of what I'm doing now. So for example, I think I would, the first few months are really, really focused on finding something that's useful to contribute to, right? Like, I think a lot of the time you spend your first 2 years just wasting time on these random ideas that that people are giving you. So your supervisor will give you an idea, then your second supervisor will give you another one, and you end up wasting months at a time running around doing all these small research projects, essentially, which are just, I'm sure they're useful at some point, but for your thesis, in the end, they, a lot of the time they just end up wasting all of your time. So I think if I started again, I'd make sure I'd have a useful topic very early on and just sort of be very efficient in doing that. But I think again, you can't really just that's not in your control, so you just have to just experience it as you go on. Because when a supervisor offers you an idea, it's very hard to just reject that outright. You have to usually go and try it out first, and then once you've seen why it's not useless, but not a very useful idea. Once you've seen that it's not that useful or not much of a contribution to your field, then you can come back and tell them why it's not a good. You can just come back and tell them that they've done this before, and then you have some sort of backup for what you're saying. But it's very hard to reject outright ideas that are given to you, especially because you don't really know very much early on. So you just have to go with what you're given and just do what you're told, essentially. But as the years go on, you quickly realize that I think pretty much everyone doesn't know what they're doing, and they're just sort of making things up until they figure out something that works. And that's what gives you confidence later on, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, it's difficult doing PhD.
Just a weird thing. It's just a weird job.
You applied when you were doing masters in Manchester, right?
Yeah, exactly. So when I applied, I still didn't even receive my master's results. So I didn't even have that benefit. So I had to make sure that I highlighted all of the other things that I did. So
do you think there was an advantage for you, like doing masters in Manchester and applying for PhD, rather than doing a master's somewhere else?
I think in terms of like on paper, there isn't really an advantage, but I think informally, if you're going to choose the same supervisor for your PhD as you have in your master's, then I think you definitely have an advantage, because that was the case for me. My master's supervisor was the same as my PhD supervisor. So when I was applying for my PhD, I made sure my master's supervisor knew about it. And I told him that I wanted to make sure he continued to supervise me for the PhD. And I think informally that creates a small advantage in that maybe if you're disadvantaged and you don't get a scholarship offer, perhaps your supervisor will help to push for you to get that, because they already know you and they're aware of your sort of standard of work, and how well you can communicate and that sort of thing. So I think that could be an informal advantage, but I think I don't think it necessarily gives you any sort of advantage on paper. But yeah, perhaps it does help you out informally in terms of just making sure that if anything goes wrong, you have someone who's supporting you, because you know that person, from sort of previous research. Yeah.
So you applied for scholarship separately from the PhD application, or?
Okay. Yeah.
So it's a bit different from Brian, right? So Brian.
Yeah, I think Brian applied in one. So he applied directly to a scholarship, I think. So he applied, as far as I'm aware, but I can't remember exactly how he did it. But I think, yeah, he applied directly to the scholarship. Whereas I applied for a PhD, and then I sent in a separate application. I think it was either a separate application, or maybe I had to email them to tell them I would want it to be considered for a scholarship.
Okay.
But there was two different steps, definitely, because it was yeah, and then there was another interview that was required for the scholarship, above the PhD interview. So I suppose it was separate for me. Yeah.
Really? What was the interview about? I didn't have an interview. So.
Really, I had the first PhD interview, the normal one, with the PGR director at that time, and then after that, I think there was I have that the opposite way around. So the first interview was with the supervisors, and that was the PhD interview, and then the second one, the scholarship one, was with the PGR director.
Really?
Yeah, I think it was Anne McBride at the time, and it was her and another professor. I can't remember her name exactly, but she was also on the interview, and they did the scholarship interview. And this was months after the PhD interview, so I had to get the PhD offer first, and then once I had the offer, I was able to then do the interview for the scholarship.
Second question: what are the most important factors that you consider in choosing a supervisor?
Okay, this is a tough one. I think let me see. I think definitely a big thing you should probably, if you want to go into a research career or like an academic career, definitely I think you should just look at sort of the research focus of the supervisor, and that's very easy to see, right? You just look at their Google Scholar profile or their university profile and look at how much they publish and how often they publish, and the sort of work or the sort of the areas they publish in, the journals they publish in, because that's essentially what counts, right? And I think if you are focused on an academic career after your PhD, and this is and this is something you want to do, then looking at the supervisor's record of publications is just a no-brainer. It's just something you have to do, right? If you're unsure, and you're sort of just want to do the PhD and focus on that for now, then I think you can just sort of speak to the supervisor and sort of see if you get along with them as a person. Because then it doesn't really matter if they have publications or not. If they are a friendly person that you can sort of work with, then essentially that's as good as it gets. And I find that it's quite hard to have both a supervisor who's friendly and a highly frequent publisher, right? It's usually that they're really good at publishing, but they're not very people driven, and they're not really not necessarily not friendly, but just not a chatty sort of friendly supervisor, right? And then the friendly ones are usually weaker on the publication record. So I think you just have to look at what you prefer. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of supervisors who are good at both, But a lot of the time, from what I see and from what my colleagues have said, it's it's either or. They're either really friendly and they're teaching focused and they have other things that they do with little publications, or they're very publication driven and they don't they don't really have time for the sort of friendly chats, and they just sort of look at the end goal of getting a paper out. So yeah, I think depending on what you want, that's what you can think about. Just sort of do is maybe speak to other people who've had supervised in the past. So I think with you, for example, you sort of gave me a few nice hints about how friendly he was, and how he's a decent person, and that was quite nice to sort of give me a heads up and make sure that I knew what I was doing. And it was helpful that I was also I had him for my master's supervision as well, so I had a sort of awareness of how friendly he was before the before the PhD. So those are things you can do. I mean, it's difficult if you're, for example, abroad and you don't have face-to-face contact, because all you can do is email and just look at the online profiles. But even that is better than doing nothing. I think you should do something at least, right? And do some due diligence and look for some evidence of the supervisor's capabilities and their areas of expertise, and then you've done all you can. And that's another thing I suppose you could do, is just email them for a chat if they're free, right? Or maybe visit them in their office, or if you're abroad, you can just do another Zoom call and just speak to them about what your interests are, and that could be helpful.
Exactly. Yeah. So, do you regret your decision or not?
Do I regret my decision for? Hang on, which question is this? For choosing a supervisor. I don't think I do. I think definitely I'm the type of person where I think if I had I think in some scenarios, I think you just sort of have to know who you are, right? And if you're the sort of person who needs pressure to work, then a supervisor, it can sort of, I mean, really, everyone's different, right? Because most, you can sort of assume that publication driven supervisors are going to pressure you to publish, but a lot of the time, those supervisors are more focused on their own publications, and they might not necessarily push you to publish either way, right? And then I suppose there are also some publication driven supervisors who are of course going to try and get the benefit of publishing with you, and will then push you, right? So it's really hard to say, but I think for me at least, it's definitely nice to have a friendly supervisor, because for example, whenever I've had some issues with timelines or with submitting things, my supervisor is very lenient, and he'll just give me more time, and he'll make sure that at the end of the day that life comes before PhD, so he'll never pressure too much to get sort of an intense work ethic out of you. But definitely I think there's a fine line between a sort of lazy or negligent supervisor and a really, really intense supervisor. I think you need to, no person is perfect, and I think there is that's sort of a compromise, a sacrifice you have to make. If you're happy with doing an intense level of work, and you know that you will you'll benefit from that, then why not go for an intense supervisor? But if you know that that's going to be difficult for you, then try and be with someone who's lenient enough to give you time when you need to slow down, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah,
good answer.
Diplomatic.
No, it's true. Like you also have to be flexible, I think. Like,
yeah,
I regret not being more intense sometimes.
I think you've been way more intense than I
really?
ever have. Man, honestly, I think I've been incredibly lazy, but I didn't start off lazy. That's the key thing, right? I started off motivated, so you're gonna have to assume what you want after. Because when I started off, I think when me and Brian started off, we were actually quite driven.
Yeah, you guys were intense.
We were driven for 3 months, and then after the 3 months where we realized no one was actually pushing us to do anything, and there was no, like, we just sort of like, well, for me at least, I just sort of slowed down. I was just like, okay, well, demotivated is the word.
Yeah, also with the frustration and like you have to do corrections every time, like going backwards. Those kind of things make you demotivated.
Yeah, man. I mean, like, I literally, bro, I think I'm on I only wrote 5 proposals in total, but it's a lot, right? 2 is more than enough. My idea is on I'm on like sort of 8th idea proposal now.
Okay.
2 years in now, which is a joke, but yeah, so it's frustrating, definitely.
Mm.
Yeah.